We designed a survey, which was an online survey, which actually still exists. And 78 organizations took those. And then we had face-to-face interviews. We held focus group discussions. And in those workshops, we had about 323 individuals and organizations. And what an enormously valuable experience, aside from just how interesting it is from a research point of view, bringing those players from the ecosystem into the same room and having them speak one-on-one. Someone representing a pension fund, speaking to someone representing a social enterprise, hugely valuable for both of them, even individually coming away from that, from an advocacy perspective, just very, very valuable. Just some of the key findings that came out of this, so you can get a sense of the data that came out of it, and I've literally just picked some easy ones to demonstrate. And some of these you'll see answer a lot of the questions I've heard over these last 2 days, people asking questions like, what kind of legal structures are these, and how are you going to address this from a regulatory perspective? So in South Africa, the majority of these organizations that are either calling themselves social enterprises or behaving like social enterprises are in fact non-profits or what is called a Section 21 company in South Africa, which is an organization, a structure that is not allowed to or does not distribute dividends to shareholders. It doesn't have shareholders, essentially. Any profit that it makes gets put back into the business. So, interesting perspective, and only 30% private companies. Giving us a sense of the maturity of these businesses and what stage of development are they in. So 63%, quite a lot of them are well established. Once again, fairly mature sector in terms of the social enterprises. The sectors of operation, this for us was also a really good indication on a variety of levels. There is a huge, as you can see, emphasis on housing and enterprise development. So, for me, the question comes in, what is this about? Is this demand-driven, or is it that there's capital available from government and other sources towards enterprise development and housing, and is that why we're seeing such an emphasis on housing and enterprise development from the social enterprises? Again, giving a sense of scale. What kind of profits did they generate in 2009? How much capital are they looking to raise? And this was important for us because it's a question that's coming from the investors. So this is, again, addressing a lot of the questions that are coming from the investors as to, well, if we had a stock exchange and you're talking about social enterprises, are they really, and can any of these things go to scale? And if we had to put millions into them, could they cope with that? Do they have the absorptive capacity? So good indication here that that is in fact the case. Intermediaries. With mapping the intermediaries, we discovered that there were, in fact, 2 types of intermediaries that we could identify. One kind that is probably more focused on providing technical assistance and supporting the social enterprises, that kind of intermediation, versus those providing financial intermediation, so more kind of your asset managers, more those representing the asset owners and the investors themselves. In understanding the investors, again, very important information for the sector as a whole, but for social enterprises as well. Where are they located? Where is the majority of it located? What are their reasons? These are the kinds of questions we'd asked in our survey. What are their reasons for declining impact investments? All very interesting for us to be able to go out and really advocate and look at where their issues are. So as you can see, the biggest one there is that the enterprise cannot sufficiently demonstrate social impact. Fascinating stuff. And then looking at their impact investment practices. So essentially, that's just intended to give you a sense of the benefits of mapping and analysis. As I said, aside from the research benefit, it really has helped in South Africa, particularly in unifying the industry and creating common understanding around issues and needs. Much of the cohesion was in fact built in a lot of those focus groups, and since then we've set up various forums where those conversations have continued. And again, wonderful to see the social and environmental space mixing with your hardcore Wall Street types at these conferences now. And then obviously enabling us to identify what needs to be done to integrate impact investing further. And so I should just tell you that the result of that research is that we're now in the process of setting up a tier 2, so a kind of intermediate platform or marketplace for private placement of impact capital in South Africa, and also in discussions with the stock exchange around setting up a board for listing social enterprises more broadly in Africa. So yeah, I mean, great results. And then obviously continuing to do a similar exercise in France. So in general, in terms of mapping, just to give you a sense of our experience of this over the last period, it's fragmented. We, at the moment, don't really have much of a sense that the communities and social businesses are disparate and all over the place. Some people have mapped themselves, many people haven't mapped themselves. We're not yet clear on where the capital flows are. We don't have a broad perspective, even though we could give you a good sense of what's happening in South Africa and more in Europe. Obviously, we don't have a kind of global perspective on that. And obviously, in the future, we're wanting to understand where the communities are, where is the capital, and how can we better make connections between those, and obviously measure the impact of that. There are a number of mapping exercises, incredible mapping exercises, here and elsewhere in the world. These are some of the online mapping institutions, mapping in the UK and Canada, mostly, as you can see, in Europe, and some others in the US as well. And we're saying, please continue to do what you're doing. Mapping is very important, but let's try and see if we can find ways to collaborate and pull all of that information into one place so that we can understand the global picture. So essentially, we have, aside from the sort of in-depth regional research that we're doing, for the last 2 years been mapping players in the ecosystem, in the impact investing ecosystem, on our online website at Nexi Development. And the idea behind that is to get some basic information so we have, from a global perspective, where everybody is and how they've categorized themselves broadly. And then it does continue to ask some more in-depth questions, so it kind of adds to our research, and obviously it's bringing everyone into the broader community so that we can start to understand the space even better. This is our process. There are a variety of ways in which we're collecting this information, some through stakeholder engagement, some of it's through our own research, organizations and individuals mapping themselves, and then being approached by organizations who are wanting us to map them or their organizations, presenting it onto the online map. And so lastly, I want to say, map yourselves. You can go to the Nexi Development website at nexidevelopment.org and join the community. Thank you.
Bueno, Carol, gracias por esta presentación. Realmente considero que el desarrollo de herramientas para saber en dónde estamos ubicados y sobre todo para que los emprendedores sepan qué disponibilidad de recursos tienen. Y aquí pues no solo estamos hablando de recursos financieros, sino otro tipo de recursos, pues realmente se hace significativo. Quería preguntarte, antes de pasar de pronto al público, si hay algunas dudas o comentarios. Está muy enfocado hacia el tema de inversión y hacia el tema de oportunidades de negocios. Pero en los ecosistemas generalmente hay otras organizaciones que proveen mucha asistencia, que realmente incrementan el impacto de la inversión y de los procesos de negocios sociales y ambientales. ¿Cómo es la interacción en el sistema, en la herramienta que ustedes han planteado de este tipo de organizaciones?
So, absolutely, and I'm sorry if I sort of tended to focus more on the social enterprises and they play a very important role. And certainly we've seen that raising the awareness through this kind of research and the mapping around those that are providing the technical assistance, most especially in measuring impact and trying to find ways to sort of demonstrate their impact, has been enormously helpful to those organizations, both the social enterprises and the investors who are trying to understand the other way around. What does all of this mean? How do we measure these things? How do we understand risk? So they definitely, whether you're asking whether they've had more of an created more of a social impact because of their existence. I'm not sure that that's necessarily true, but in being able to at least demonstrate and support those organizations in communicating that, absolutely. Yeah.
Bueno, quisiera saber si en nuestro público hay alguien que tenga alguna pregunta, alguna inquietud. Sí.
Two questions for Carol. The first one is, can you give us a sense of the social capital exchanges? How successful have they been? How many companies have gotten financing? What's the volume of that financing? And also on the ecosystem that you mapped in South Africa, what is the size of that ecosystem? And obviously there's different ways of defining size, sales of companies or how much capital these companies has. But do you have any financial measures that give us a sense of how big this ecosystem is in South Africa?
Yeah, so just in terms of the exchanges, it's still very early stages. So it's not up and running yet. We're hoping that it's going to launch towards the end of the year, and only then will we be able to give you a better sense of how many and what type. We're looking at launching probably only with about 20 social enterprises. It's not masses of capital they're looking at. It's anywhere between kind of 10 million rand, which is, I don't know, about $1.5 million US, to somewhat more. Sometimes it's 50 to 100 million rand at a time. We don't think it's going to be very online as a system. We think it's not going to be particularly sophisticated. We definitely see this as something that will evolve over time. Certainly with a lot of our research, the social enterprises wanting to list, and they very much want to list, for them, raising capital is important, but the exposure and the endorsement that they're going to get, and for them what feels like sort of really making them feel like they're part of some kind of formal environment is what's most important to them, that they can even more demonstrate their transparency and their kind of social impact, I guess, has been what's been most valuable. So watch the space, definitely, very exciting. In terms of the ecosystem in South Africa, I can't give you specific information. I can get it. I don't have it in my head, unfortunately. But I'd certainly be able to get that information for you if that would be of interest. Sure.
Tú mencionaste que ya la herramienta se está utilizando, no solo, bueno, el ejemplo de referencia es Sudáfrica, pero la han utilizado en otras partes, Canadá, bueno, Estados Unidos. ¿Han visto una diferencia significativa? ¿Cuál es la diferencia significativa? Porque me imagino que hay una diferencia entre un ecosistema como el surafricano, que quizás se podría, bajo ciertas condiciones, tener más similitudes con los ecosistemas de América Latina, que los ecosistemas, por ejemplo, de Canadá o de países más desarrollados. ¿Cuáles son las diferencias que han encontrado en este tipo de ecosistemas al aplicar la herramienta?
So just to be clear, our own tool has only really been used in France, and it's only just started in France now, so I can give you some high-level feedback on that. You would think that about South Africa as well. We, on the one side, are very comparable to a third world country. On the other side, we're seen as the wealthy country of Africa because there is so much money, and so much sophistication as well, in addition to the kind of poverty and need for capacity development. What's, I think, been most interesting in comparing South Africa to France initially has been the similarities more than the differences. I know that France were very much saying to us it's going to be different and the context is different and the needs are different, but really what we've seen is the social enterprises are saying the same kinds of things. The investors are saying the same kinds of things. You know, they're all talking about we need to measure. Social enterprises are saying we're nervous about mission drift. You know, so we definitely are seeing greater similarities, more than we expected in terms of differences.